Okay, well, everybody knows about the public sector and the private sector. Public sector is anything to do with government, anything government owns or runs, basically. So you know what that is. The private sector, to me, is anything, any organization that's owned by private investors, owned by people who invest, whether it's entrepreneurs who invest their own effort and their own sweat capital and their own money, or other investors who invest in other businesses, whether they buy stock or whatever. And the plural sector is basically just about everything else. To me, there's four components of it. One is the one are organizations that are owned by their members, like co-ops. You could argue that churches are owned by their members in some ways. Another is organizations that are owned by nobody. So nobody owns McGill, nobody owns Greenpeace, you know, nobody owns that kind of thing. A third are mass movements or social movements, like we saw in Egypt and in Cairo a few years ago. And the fourth are what I call social initiatives, where people create not-for-profit activities to improve things, like a Meals on Wheels thing to deliver food to people who can't get out of their houses and so on. So basically it's those four components. The important thing about the plural sector is it's everybody. And you yourselves have probably interacted with 5 plural sector organizations this week. One is McGill. You may belong to a sports club. You might be going to a church. You know what I mean? We all are doing it all the time. But it's invisible. Nobody sort of thinks about it, because the whole argument is between left and right, between governments and markets, between companies and governments and so on. But the plural sector is huge, massive. Well, just imagine that you're doing your bachelor's degree online. Imagine if you never saw, two of you are sitting there together. Imagine if you never saw anybody in your class except on a screen like this. Imagine if you didn't have discussions after class about what the professor just said. Imagine if you couldn't get together to play football. I mean, just imagine a life without community. And then think of the degree to which it's discouraged. For example, people who live in apartment buildings often don't even know their neighbors. You know, in previous times, still happens in some American states where people get together in the town square and vote. It happens in New Hampshire and places like that still, where there's a very strong sense of community and a sense of people working together. Somebody said very cleverly that these movements are more about communication and about collaboration, and they don't necessarily encourage collaboration. Collaboration happens in smaller groups that get together, that drive change. And you have all kinds of examples. A group in Holland just took its own government to court on its inactivity in global warming. And the court, the Dutch court, ruled that the government had to do something about global warming. So here was an active group of citizens who forced that issue through the government. In India, people got fed up enough with the British colonialism that they engaged in the Salt March, where they all marched together, and they all got together, all certain numbers of them, and that was basically a driving force in Indian independence. So when people get fed up enough, they start acting, they do things, and that changes things. Pick something that you really think is important, like you know, educating disadvantaged kids who aren't getting enough in school. There's a group that started in I think it was Chile, and then I met a guy who picked it up in Peru. And they have adults volunteering to go into schools on Saturday morning for kids who aren't getting enough education, and they volunteer their time to help educate those kids. So they're doing something very constructive and very positive. Or pick something you hate, like pharmaceutical pricing or something, I don't know, something you think is just wrong, and get clever. You know, the interesting thing is that it's so easy to bring down a big bureaucracy if you're a bit clever, like David and Goliath, you know. If you're a bit clever, you can bring down a big organization, or at least get it to change its behaviors. If you're running a factory with all kinds of people doing very boring work, you might need more hierarchy. If you're trying to run the creative place to do research and come up with new ideas and advertising agencies and things like that, then you need a much more flat structure. I'm not a fan of hierarchy.
Yeah.
I think there's much too much of it.